Good evening, everybody. My name is Tanil, and I'm the Community Engagement Director here at HAA. Thank you again for joining us on a Wednesday night for a really fantastic live Zoom we have planned for you. Tonight, we're talking about exposing the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has long managed to present itself as a moderate voice, convincing many, including our Albanese government. But how accurate is that image? Tonight, we're going to unpack the truth with Lieutenant Colonel Maurice Hirsch, the former director of military prosecution for Judea and Samaria in the IDF. He's one of the world's leading experts on Palestinian incitement and legal strategies, and currently heads the Initiative for Palestinian Authority, Accountability and Reform at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Hirsch has advised Israel's Ministry of Defense and chaired an advisory committee within the Ministry of Interior. He brings deep first-hand insight into Israel's security and governance issues. It is such an honor to have him tonight. Please join me to welcome Maurice Hirsch.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address this important forum. The Palestinian Authority. I'm just going to get straight into it. My background a little bit, as was explained, I studied law in England, moved to Israel, went into the army, spent 20 years in the army, left the army. Most of the time in the army, I spent either with legal advice to Judea and Samaria or in the prosecution of a terrorist. In my final position there, I was the head of the prosecution for Judea and Samaria. I left the army and I joined for a short period of time Palestinian Media Watch, and I worked with them trying to understand what the Palestinian Authority is, how they work and how they function. And for the last 2 years, I've been with the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. The idea is to try and understand what this Palestinian Authority is, how it works, what its policies are, to what extent can it really be a legitimate consideration for any type of peace coexistence, maybe as an alternative to peace, something that maybe we can work with. So what I'm going to try and do at the moment, really it is a subject that you can talk about for days, if not weeks. I'm just going to choose 5 different subjects and try and just give you a little bit of an introduction to each one of them so that you'll have a little bit of a better understanding. So the first one is, what is the Palestinian Authority's basic principle and approach to Israel? So the Palestinian Authority, as we know, was created. It's this function that was functionary that was created as part of the Oslo Accords, 93, 95. We're going to have some type of a body that will be responsible for Palestinian autonomy. And really, it'll be a new body of governance for the Palestinians, possibly. I think that was very much the thought process, an alternative to the organization that had been existing until then, to the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, which had really been tainted as a terror organization, recognized by many as a terrorist organization. And so we're going to create this new body, and that body will then move forward creating peace. And unfortunately, from day one, the Palestinian Authority has been really subject to the control of the PLO. The PLO, Yasser Arafat, they pretended that there were elections. I'll expand on the elections later in the discussion. I'm going to talk about a little bit about governance. They pretended that there were elections, but it was like elections in Soviet Russia. Everybody can vote, but there's only one party to vote for. So the results were quite clear. And so we had the PLO running basically the Palestinian Authority for the last 30 years. The PLO has not changed for 1 second, despite having agreed and signed on the Oslo Accords. The PLO still functions and works towards what they call the stages plan, or the plan of stages, whichever way you want to translate that from the Arabic. The plan of stages was created in 1974. It says that the PLO will work to establish any threshold anywhere, any footprint anywhere around the world, particularly obviously in Palestine, to try and then promote the goal of the organization to destroy Israel. That is their fundamental premise. It hasn't changed. And to this day, the PLO and its governing body now, or its vehicle for governance, let's say the Palestinian Authority, has that central idea as their main policy: denial of Israel's right to exist. They deny Jewish history. They deny Jewish connection to the land of Israel. They call Jews thieves, that they really did take a land that wasn't theirs. Open brackets. They pretend that at some stage there was a Palestinian state and that the Jews came along and stole the Palestinian state. We know that isn't true. There never was a Palestinian state. The only possible remnants of what could be a Palestinian state is of course Jordan. And I invite you all to just on that subject, read a paper that I just wrote and published regarding Israel's legal right to Judea and Samaria. Now, when you read Israel's legal right to Judea and Samaria, it's the understanding that Israel's right to Judea and Samaria is exactly the same as its right to Tel Aviv, to Herzliya, and to Netanya. So if you think that there is a difference between the two, then I'm afraid you're very much mistaken. And if you accept the premise that there is this other Palestinian entity that has a right to a state of any kind in Judea and Samaria / Gaza, then at the same time what you're saying is that really there is no ability to recognize the rest of the state of Israel. And that is exactly the position of the Palestinian Authority, the PLO. They deny Israel's right to exist. For them, Jews are a religion and not a people. Now, that is a critical difference, because if you're a religion, religions don't have countries. People have countries. And so for the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, Jews are just a religion. They have no right to a state. They never had a state. The Jews that call themselves Jews today aren't really the original Jews of the Bible. So they argue, and really they are the embodiment, the direct descendants, 5,000 years descendants of the original Canaanites, the Jebusites. They don't so much mention the Philistines, despite maybe the proximity of the name, but they are whoever was controlling the land of Israel. And so even if you try and argue the Bible as a source for any type of historical connection, they say, well, obviously the Jews came and stole the land of Israel also from the kings that were here in Canaan at the time. And that is a fundamental, it goes through everything that they do. It is their guiding principle. And based on that, they then move forward. So that's maybe the first subject, denial of Israel's right to exist. How do they present that to the Palestinian people? So obviously the most, as we know, there's the famous saying, if you want to feed someone for a meal, you give him a hamburger. I'm bringing it up to date. If you want to feed him for a week, you give him some buns and some meat. But if you want to feed him for the rest of his life, you teach him how to cook and how to hunt and how to make food. So what the Palestinian Authority did, what the PLO did, is to recognize that the future of the Palestinian narrative, as they call it, is based on education. Now, every single one of you, I'm sure, has heard the argument that UNRWA's school curriculum, I'm moving just a second over to UNRWA. UNRWA's school curriculum is the worst thing ever. It promotes incitement. It denies Israel's right to exist. It promotes terrorism. It educates the Palestinian refugees that they will one day return to Israel and destroy Israel demographically and democratically. Now, the biggest misunderstanding, I would argue, on this field is that UNRWA doesn't have its own school curriculum. That's the big news. UNRWA, wherever it exists, teaches the school curriculum of the national authority. So if you're in Lebanon, they teach the Lebanese curriculum. If you're in Jordan, they teach the Jordanian curriculum, and so on. Why? Because those children will then go through the school system, they'll take national exams, and then move on possibly to higher education. But there needs to be obviously the access to those institutions through the higher education in the specific country. So in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, what UNRWA teaches, what everyone complains about UNRWA's content is not from UNRWA. It's from the PLO. It's from the PA. It's that incitement to terrorism. It's that promotion of terrorism. It's that glorification of terrorism on every single step of the way. what you find there in the UNRWA school books, which we recognize and understand about, is the Palestinian Authority's school books. You don't see maps with Israel. Israel is wiped off the face of the maps in all of their school books. This is all Palestine. When they claim that they only want a state in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, that is not what they're saying. They're saying, and you've all heard it, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is not a populist terrorist slogan of Hamas designed only for the aftermath of October 7. This is a slogan of the PLO from its outset. This is a slogan of the Palestinian Authority teaching that idea to the children every single day of the week, every single day that they see a map in a school book, every single time that they see a map on an andata around the areas that they control. That is their idea. That is the way that they understood. If we teach the children, if we ensure that the children are indoctrinated and brainwashed from a young age, we can ensure that they will then go on and do what we want them to do, which is to murder Jews and to destroy Israel. Now, just open brackets again, I apologize. October 7 massacre. What we saw on the October 7 massacre was not 16-year-olds and under coming into Israel to murder the Jews around Gaza. Why do I say 16 years old? That's a somewhat random age. It's very specific, though. Gaza was under the control of Hamas from 2007 through 2023. 16-year-olds, the maximum age. But so who educated those people who came across the border, who were 30, 35-year-olds, to so viciously hate Jews that they could take women, children, babies, burn them, massacre them, rape them, murder them? That was the education of the Palestinian Authority. This is what they've been taught to do. This is their socialization through the Palestinian curricula from day one, from the moment they step into kindergarten all the way through school. That's what they see. That's the venom that they are fed on a constant basis. Israel has no right to exist. Israel must be destroyed. And then they add in, obviously, that religious fervor, that religious element, which isn't restricted only to Hamas, that there is a religious Islamic commandment to every believer to do everything they can to take back the Dar al-Islam, to take back the lands of Islam, to wipe out Israel. Israel cannot exist according to their theology, because that would mean that they are willing to accept the fact that Israel will exist, that the Jews have a right to exist on a piece of land which was once part of some Islamic property, and that is something which they fundamentally reject. So that's a little bit on their education system. There is obviously much more to go into there, and really it's a whole subject in and of itself. But move on for a second. Incitement. This is what we were talking about really at the introduction. This is particularly one of the subjects that I've been involved in for a very long time. What exactly is incitement to terrorism? How do you define the incitement? How do you recognize the incitement? And really, what parts of it are illegitimate, if at all? Is there just freedom of speech and you can say anything you want? Or is there a line that you cannot cross? And so I would argue that even within the legal frameworks of criminal prosecutions and certainly of public policy, that there are two levels to incitement. There is the level of direct calls for violence. This is something which obviously we understand is crossing a red line. I am calling on all Muslims to rise up and go and murder Jews. That's Hamas. Very, very clear. That's what they said. But that's also the Palestinian Authority. When Mahmoud Abbas calls on all Muslims to go and shed their blood in order to defend the Al-Aqsa Mosque against the, as he said, the filthy feet of the Jews that are contaminating the Temple Mount, then that is a direct call to violence, because you're seeing this religious element of someone really coming and trampling on everything that you hold in esteem. The third, as they say or claim, the third most important site for Islam around the world, and the Jews and their filthy feet are contaminating it. Mahmoud Abbas makes that statement in August 2015, and thereafter Israel is flooded with what they then would call the knife intifada, which starts in October 2015, and you see that direct involvement. Now, at the time, I was the head of the prosecution for Judea and Samaria, and you're now trying to understand, where are the limits of free speech? When does glorification of terrorism, is that in and of itself a form of incitement? If you say that what a terrorist did when he murdered people is a good act, it's something that's worth emulating. For example, in the education system, just going back to that for a second, the Palestinian Authority has a hero, a heroine, let's call her. Her name is Dalal Mughrabi. Dalal Mughrabi, for those who aren't familiar with her name, don't misunderstand. You haven't missed someone great in history. Dalal Mughrabi has one claim, and one claim alone, in the Palestinian Authority. She has schools named after her. She is taught in the curriculum as someone whose actions should be emulated. She is really the pinnacle of Palestinian development. No, she didn't invent an app. She didn't invent or discover a cure for cancer. The only thing that Dalal Mughrabi ever did was to lead a group of terrorists in 1978 onto a bus, an Israeli bus, on the coastal plain, and there to murder 37 people, 12 children and 25 adults. Dalal Mughrabi is the hero of Palestinian society. When you say that, is that incitement? When you say that about someone who carried out an attack 50 years ago, possibly, it's lost its force. But when you see someone now immediately murdering someone, and you go out and you say, well, my son was a hero, everyone in the village is saying, well, these people are heroes because they went and murdered Jews. Where does that line really pass? When does that idea of incitement become a criminal offense? So that's, again, when you're talking of this subject, I just, in July this year, I decided to adopt a new project. The Palestinian Authority has an official website. It's like Pravda, for those of you who remember it, the official spokesman mouthpiece of the Communist Party. So the Palestinians have Wafa. And so what I did was I went together with an assistant, we went over the entire month of publications on Wafa. Let's see how many include expressions of incitement, whether it be Israel has no right to exist, Jews are thieves, Jews have contaminated whatever it is, the Jews have stolen something, Israel has murdered Palestinians. And we looked at that month of publications, and the result was astounding. 99.9% of all of the publications were incitement, had some form of presenting a false narrative that was designed to blacken the name of Israel, to besmirch Jews. The only neutral publications were the weather reports, nothing else. Every other single report talked about the Jews, talked about Israel, talked about Israel's alleged crimes. What you didn't see there anywhere is, well, what happened in Palestinian culture this week? What happened in Palestinian business this week? Is there no Palestinian industry? Because if you read Wafa, which is, again, the official mouthpiece, this is what the PA wants its population to hear as what they are doing. There's no content. It's only focused on hating Israel and pushing towards the destruction of Israel. So that is obviously a subject in and of itself. Moving on to the next subject. So once you've taught, obviously, the Palestinians that you should move to really and act on the incitement that you've heard, on the education that you've heard, and they go out and murder Jews, they go out and participate in terrorism, there is an additional obligation that you then have to take on. Now, this obligation says like this: any time a Palestinian actually acts on what we, the Palestinian Authority, on what we, the PLO, said, and they participate in terror, and they are then arrested by Israel, we will then adopt them as an employee of the Palestinian Authority. This is what has famously become known as the Palestinian Authority's pay for slay policy. The more time you get in prison, the more time you spend in prison, so your salary goes up over time. You are an employee of the Palestinian Authority. You go in, you get the basic salary. After 3 years, I mean, we would all like this just as as an employment contract. After 3 years, your salary goes up, guaranteed. After 5 years, your salary is then doubled. After 10 years, your salary goes up again. 15 years, you get another bonus. 20 years, and so on. To the highest salary that is paid to the Palestinian terrorists is a salary that is equivalent to that of a minister in the Palestinian government. This is the highest esteem, obviously, that the Palestinian Authority can give to these terrorists, to say, you know what, you're ours, we adopt you, we're going to pay you a salary and reward you for your terrorism. Now, it's not only the terrorists from Fatah. Fatah is the main party in the PLO, Yasser Arafat's party, Mahmoud Abbas's party. It's all terrorists. That is a stipulation of their law. This isn't some type of weird policy. This isn't something which they necessarily hide. This is a law that Mahmoud Abbas pushed in 2004. Mahmoud Abbas then in 2006 set the first rising pay scale. In 2011, he raised the salaries again, in some instances raising the salaries by 300%. Now, we're talking about payments that are in somewhere in the region of 1 billion shekels a year, right? That's a lot of money. That's 350 million US dollars every year. That goes to the payment of all of these different benefits to terrorists. They have not only the idea of paying the salaries to the terrorists while they're in prison as a reward for their actions, but rather they even have a program for terrorists when they are released. So I tell the story of one day I was sitting, I was the head of a prosecution, as I said, and one day a Palestinian defense lawyer comes into my office, plea bargain discussions. He'd already been and sat with my district prosecutor, and he was now coming to me to try and get a better deal. And I said to him, you know what? They offered you 54 months. I'm going to give you 52 months. It really does make no difference, an extra period of time. We can save the time for the court. Says, Maurice, fantastic offer. I think that's a very fair. I'll take it to my client. He comes back a week later and he says, Maurice, my client's rejected your offer. So I said, fine, you know what? We can go to trial. It's all good. I don't mind going to trial. We have the evidence. He's the one who's going to lose. He said, you don't understand. He wants 60 months in jail. This was offensive. Right? This was offensive to me because I had a reputation of being quite a stringent prosecutor. And really many of the defense lawyers were so offended by the stringency policy that I was leading. And suddenly you have a terrorist who wants to spend more time in jail than I'm even offering him. I didn't understand it. I didn't agree. It was only after I left and I joined Palestinian Media Watch that I understand and really get into this idea of pay for state. Did I understand that a terrorist who spends 5 years in jail has basically won the lottery, because that guarantees him a pension for the rest of his life. It's an incredible system. You're guaranteed a job. If they can't find you a job, you get a salary for the rest of your life. It's a nominal salary. Let's be fair. It's not the full salary. And so 5 years in jail, 60 months, you're getting paid while you're in jail anyway. If you're going to do 52 months, well, you might as well stay in jail for an extra couple of months and enjoy all of the benefits. The next step on that program is 10 years, right? According to the regulations and the law, if you've spent 10 years in jail, here I'm telling you, friends, you rarely have, as a terrorist, won the lottery. Now, who spends 10 years in jail? Like, these are the more serious offenses. These are the people who are planting bombs, who are shooting, who are injuring people. These aren't your run-of-the-mill stone throwers. These are the hardened terrorists. And for them, the Palestinian Authority has an even better deal. If you've spent 10 years in jail, you are guaranteed, no matter what, a position in the Palestinian Authority. You get a job. It's based on a pay scale and a position scale that is equivalent to time spent in prison equals seniority in a position. And so you get put in. You spend 10 years in jail, you're going to be an administrator of the A level. You spent 15 years in jail, you're an administrator A plus. Just for an example, there are specific definitions there, and so on and so forth. There is only one condition to the payment of those salaries to the terrorists who have been in jail for 10 years. The condition is amazing, that if they actually call you to come and work, you have to come. If they don't call you, money for nothing and your chicks for free. That's it. That's it. You simply get paid a tremendous salary as a reward for terrorism, not only in prison, but afterwards as well. Now, we're talking about people who really, this is their entire system, their entire Palestinian Authority self-governance is based on contributions from the world, right? They're always constantly complaining that they have no money. The world contributes money to the Palestinian Authority. And what do they spend it on? 7%, more or less, of their entire budget goes to paying rewards to terrorists. They have an additional program that pays allowances to the families of dead terrorists. Your daughter, your son, went and blew himself up and murdered some Jews. You're now a hero of the village. And as a mark of acceptance and of enjoyment, thank you for whoever put the pay chart up, as a mark of acceptance and gratification and glorification, we're now going to give you 1,500, 1,400 shekel every single month. Why? Absolutely no reason, simply because your child went and murdered Jews. So that is the pay for slay policy. All of these terrorists now were being released. Many of them, I was involved in their prosecution in one way or another at the different levels, and they have come out and they have then used the money to promote terrorism, right? People, the murderers of Malachi Rosenfeld, for example, in 2015, said that they had received the money for the weapons that they bought from Ahmed Najjar. Ahmed Najjar was a terrorist who was released in 2011 as part of the Shalit deal. He was being paid a salary by the PA, and he said, you know what, let's take that money and use it for, from their point of view, for good purpose. Let's buy weapons to murder Jews. And so these people basically become millionaires overnight. When we're talking about a minimum salary in the Palestinian Authority of 1,800 shekel a month, if you're going to get paid 1,400 shekel just for being involved in terrorism, and that salary is going to go up so quickly over time, you're making more money as a terrorist than if you actually had to work for your living. And albeit you're in prison, but you have that really dowry waiting for you when you come out of prison. The salaries paid are not for the families, they're for the terrorists. It's not social welfare. I cross-examined one of the representatives of the Palestinian Authority as part of a a civil trial of victims of terror. And the question was very, very simple. You claim that it is social welfare. So what are the needs-based requirements for receiving the salary? Do you ask the family, do you have, how many mouths do you have to feed? Is the terrorist married? Does he have children? And you realize suddenly there's no differentiation. A rich terrorist and a poor terrorist receive the same salary. 75% of the terrorists who go to jail are single. Well, why do they need to receive a salary at all? They weren't the breadwinners for the families. They were involved in their terrorism. They weren't going out and working. So why do you have that? And if they are needs-based requirements, well, then you have the social security mechanism of the Palestinian Authority, which, by the way, you get the same allowance, more or less about 1,800 shekel, but you get that for a 3-month period. So it's much more financially worth it to be involved in terrorism than it is in any way to actually work or even to be on social welfare in the Palestinian Authority. Pay for slay is something which obviously everybody or most people with any type of basic morality rejects. That's the Taylor Force Act in 2018, which conditions U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority on abolition of pay for slay. So if you're now the Palestinian Authority and you're offered $250 million every single year, or continue paying salaries to terrorists, decision made by Mahmoud Abbas, the US can keep its money. We don't want it. We want to carry on paying salaries to terrorists. Again, it's not just something which is a nice to have. It's not just a nice policy. It is a guiding principle of the Palestinian Authority. As Mahmoud Abbas has said so eloquently time after time, if the Palestinian Authority is left with just 1 penny in its coffers, it will first pay that penny to the terrorists before anyone else. And that is, they literally put their money where their mouth is. Teachers get paid less. Doctors get paid less. All of the Palestinian civil sector waits for the salaries to be paid first to the terrorists. So that's pay for slay. We can talk about that a lot. I'll go on to just the final subject, just watching the time. And the final subject is governance. Now, governance really is something which is divided up into I'm going to divide it up just for our purposes into 3 different levels. The first and basic level is congratulations to the Palestinian Authority. They are tremendous leaders in the idea of, wait for it, gender equality, promoting gender equality. How do we know that's true? We know this is true because when we did a study recently looking at the major development goals that the European Union has for the Palestinian Authority, and we looked at, well, what is the development goal that they gave the most amount of money to? And we found 1.8 billion euros flowed from the European Union to the Palestinian Authority to promote gender equality. And so I asked you, well, what did they actually manage to achieve with that? Did they outlaw, for example, honor killings? Absolutely not. Do women have a better standing in a dictatorial, misogynistic, Sharia-based society? Have they changed the way that women inherit? No, there's Sharia law for that, which governs exactly what they do. And unfortunately, none of that exists. But that's the way they govern. They sell the Europeans an idea that they possibly want to see, take the money, and do nothing. Now, the Europeans see this and they understand it, as do other countries in the world. But that's part of their governance. There is nothing that changes even in internal Palestinian ideas. The corruption is rife. The theft is rife. And that's something which is very much a characteristic of the Palestinian government. Palestinian government 201, let's call it, elections. Palestinian Authority is meant to be this panacea of democracy. So says the Oslo Accords. So says Palestinian law. Every 4 years, there will be elections for the head, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority. Every 4 years, there will be elections for the parliament. The Palestinian Authority has now been around for 31 years. That means that they should have had at least 7 different elections. They've had 4. They've had 4, and they even haven't had 4 for each one of those positions. They've had 2 for the position of president, chairman, and 2 for the parliament. 1 in 1994, 95, 96. That was that whole process that we're going through. They've established the Palestinian Authority. Now we're going to have elections. Yasser Arafat is elected as the president, and they have elections for the parliament at the same time. Yasser Arafat, despite the fact that Palestinian law says that you can have a 4-year term plus a second and final 4-year term, almost like Australia, Yasser Arafat stays in his position until he dies in 2004. Mahmoud Abbas goes to elections in 2005, and he is elected in January 2005. He is now in his 21st year of his first 4-year term. It's amazing. We're talking about classic dictatorship, but everybody says it's a democracy. The elections are the same thing for the parliament. They had elections in 2006. That parliament continued on until the next elections 10 years later in 2006. Obviously, those elections, as we all know, were won by Hamas. When you hear that argument that Hamas illegally seized the Gaza Strip from the Palestinian Authority, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a crock. It's not true. Hamas won the elections in 2006, despite $50 million that the US donated to Mahmoud Abbas to ensure that he and his Fatah party win. Hamas won the elections. They should be, and I know this sounds terribly controversial, Hamas is the leadership of the Palestinians. They were the ones who were chosen. If they went to elections just last night, there was a new study published by a Palestinian market research institution where they asked Palestinians, well, who would you vote for now? Like, we've seen the destruction after October 7. We've seen what Hamas has done to you. Who would you vote for, Hamas or Fatah? The answer from the Palestinians is they would still vote for Hamas. That is the harsh reality, and that's what we're talking about. So what is we're talking about? I wrote a study on the recent push of different countries, including Australia, of course, to recognize the state of Palestine. Each one of them had its insistence, its announcement that there will be elections in the Palestinian Authority, and it will become a democratic state. Well, why would we believe that's true? They haven't had elections for the last 20 years, but suddenly now, because of October 7, because they managed to murder, from their point of view, murder 1,200 Jews, kidnap, rape, torture, now we're going to have elections. Well, obviously, why wouldn't there be elections? When you talk about, well, how does the governance even work there? You get this idea of the change that Mahmoud Abbas promised again in the electoral law. No longer, says Mahmoud Abbas to Macron, no longer will Hamas be allowed to participate in the elections. We're going to go back to the original idea of elections for everybody, but just one party. You can only vote for Fatah, basically. And so that's the democracy that he is now trying to promote in the Palestinian Authority. Let's see what the Palestinian people have to say about that. And if you just follow what's going on and with this, really, I'll wrap up. Just over the last few days, Mahmoud Abbas said, when I can no longer fulfill my function, Mahmoud Abbas is 89 years old on the 15th of December of November, I think. He will turn 90. And so he says, if and when I am unable to carry out my functions, so my deputy, Hossein al-Sheikh, that he appointed about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, will take over from me. Well, that sounds perfectly like elections and democracy. Open brackets. Who is Hussein al-Sheikh? Story, and with this I'll finish. In 2001, a pair of suicide bombers and their handlers walk into the office of Hussein al-Sheikh in Ramallah. They are on their way to carry out a terrorist attack, and they have everything. They have the suicide belts, they have the guns, and Hussein al-Sheikh said, just make sure that you succeed, take 2 hand grenades and a wad of cash so that you can buy clothes to look like the Jews. This is the guy who is potentially going to be the next head of the Palestinian Authority, because governance there will be, he'll take over for Mahmoud Abbas. Well, we can't have elections because Israel won't let us. That's their constant excuse. And therefore he will remain as the next tin pot dictator of the Palestinian Authority. This is really in very, very, very small, short sound bites on those different subjects. We can talk about many, many other different subjects, but I suggest that that I now finish and open it up to questions if anyone has.
Wow, thank you, Maurice. I'm lost for words with all the information, and that was really fantastic. We will start the questions with our CEO and President, Robert Gregory.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, Maurice. That was really, really excellent, as Neil said, very informative. I just wanted to ask, so I think everyone here understands how bad the Palestinian Authority is. What can countries like Australia, or what can the Jewish community in Australia do to pressure the government? I mean, we have a Palestinian, I don't know if it's an embassy, but they have an outpost here with someone here from the Palestinian Authority. And also, what can Israel do? I mean, we've had the prisoner release. Obviously, the hostages are out. Why is Israel just letting these prisoners return to terrorism? Can't they now go after the money that they've been handed, and can't they face some consequences now that the hostages are free?
Well, so that really is a string of questions. I'll try and address them. I think, unfortunately, and I apologize if I'm going to offend anyone. Really, I do. That's not my intention. I fear that Australia is to a great extent lost. The current government is pushing forward with both funding the Palestinian Authority in the knowledge that they are basically terrorists, promoting terrorists, and rewarding terrorists for murdering Jews. They know exactly who these people are, and yet they are blindly pushing forward on giving Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah the prize for October 7, which is the recognition of the state of Palestine. That's something which really is fundamentally wrong, and it's something which I fear is almost irreversible. And so now it's trying to understand, where can this policy go? What are they going to do? What are they going to do next? And really, the idea is to try and push for both transparency in financial contributions to the Palestinian Authority, in anything that they do with the Palestinian Authority, to see where that money is going, what safeguards there are against abuse against that money going towards terrorism and incitement and the promotion of terrorism, and to education, to hatred. That's really, I think, the fundamental, bringing this information to the public, bringing this information to who I believe even people who are really well informed as to what's going on in Israel, maybe, and relations with the Palestinian Authority. I feel that not everyone knows exactly who the Palestinian Authority is and just how bad they are. So it's just taking the information that's out there and presenting it, providing it to the general population. Just know who you're funding, know who you're in bed with, understand who these terrorists are. On the second question of what to do with the money, this is something that I write about, unfortunately, far too much. 65% of the Palestinian Authority's funding comes from Israel. That means that out of every 100 shekel that they pay to a terrorist for murdering, as a reward for murdering our children, they received a 65 shekel participation from the government of Israel. This is a product of, or a function of, the Oslo Accords. We agreed to collect certain taxes, give those taxes to the Palestinian Authority, we were buying peace. And instead, they're using the money that we give them to murder our children, to operate in the ICC, operate in the ICJ, to promote Palestinian statehood in the UN. This is something that really does need to change, and the Palestinians needs to face the same dilemma as they were presented with by the US. Choose life or choose death. Choose promotion of peace and receive money, or we're going to stop giving you that money. Everything you do is a fundamental breach of the Oslo Accords, and therefore we will not give you any of the money that we give to you as a result of the Oslo Accords. I think that's the way forward. It is difficult to chase after every single penny that was paid to these terrorists. Some of them have spent the money. They've bought properties in areas under the control of the Palestinian Authority, so we can't really get there. And we can't seize those assets because they are under the control of the Palestinian Authority. And so really the goal needs to be cutting this malfeasance off at its roots. Money as we read in Kohelet just recently on Sukkot, and money solves everything. HaKesef ya'aneh al hakol. That's something which is it's a fundamental. Without money, you can't have terrorism. Without money, you can't fund incitement. Without money, you can't have an embassy in Australia. And we're giving them that money. That is something that Israel's government needs to change, and it needs to ignore the calls from the rabble, including Penny Wong. Well, Israel is not meeting its obligations under the Oslo Accords. You're right, we're not, because they have fundamentally breached the Oslo Accords, and therefore they should be now void. That's where I would see on both the domestic level and to Israel's government. And when they eventually make that decision, for the last few months, there hasn't been money transferred to the Palestinian Authority. It's causing quite an uproar. I won't go too much into that decision, but it is there, and we will see how long Israel actually manages to keep that up.
Thank you, Maurice. Before we hit our Q&A with the audience, speaking of money, I did want to interrupt to talk about our charity campaign, which is on November 30th. That's the one time of the year, AJ, that we get to raise money to support our activities throughout the whole year. So please do get involved. If you have capacity to volunteer to be one of our callers, please do contact us. Our information is online. If you'd like to continue to donate and support the work of AJA, you can also go to our website, jewishassociation.org.au, to support. We have a fabulous Zoom planned next week with Sharon Haskell, so please make sure you tune in then. And finally, I can see there are hundreds of people watching now on Facebook Live. We always encourage you, if you want to join into our Q&A and be an active audience participant, please make sure you join the Zoom link. But really wonderful to see so many of you watching live right now. We'll start with Alan. Please unmute.
Thanks, Maurice. I just want to go back to the curricula for a moment. From the day that anything changes, from the day that the school curricula change, it's going to take probably 1 or 2 generations for anything to really be seen on the street. Have any of the geniuses around the world turned their mind as to what's going to happen in that interim period and how it's going to be managed?
So really, unfortunately, not. You're quite right. Denazification or de-radicalization, whichever way you want to see it, is something that does take time. Changing that school curriculum is not simple. Which school curriculum do you replace it with? Obviously, we're not going to replace it with the Zionist school curriculum. Could it be? Could there be other alternatives? So, in a plan that we at the JCFA, together with the IDSF, with the Bitchonistim, wrote already back in November 2023, for the day after in Gaza, we suggested, for example, that the school curriculum that has been adopted in the United Arab Emirates, that is a curriculum which is exceptionally tolerant, understands coexistence, that could be used as a basis for moving forward. Yes, it will take time, but it's very similar in its nature to really the post-World War II denazification of Germany. It takes time. There will be remnants that still hold those fundamentally racist and genocidal ideas and ideology, but we'll be able to, I hope, change at least the outlook of most of the people. And it's something that education system alone isn't sufficient. It has to be really that holistic approach to changing all of the different elements of Palestinian society, similar to that adopted in post World War II Nazi Germany. But that is what we're looking at, and that is something which, at the moment, no one is even discussing. They don't. Many of them fail to even recognize the destructive nature of the Palestinian Authority. The European Union, for example. The European Union says, well, we only pay salaries to terrorists, as if they've managed to say, well, we're not going to fund, salaries to teachers. We're not going to fund the salaries to the terrorists. We're only going to pay the teachers. Well, is that any better when the teachers are the ones teaching the children how to go out and murder? They're the ones who are inciting them to murder. They are teaching them the basics of murder 101, as it were. So understanding the idea that the education needs to be changed, and also understanding the idea that money is fungible. The Australians, for example, a few years ago decided, well, we are also not going to directly fund the Palestinian Authority because of pay for say it's bad. We're only going to implement projects for the Palestinian Authority and indirect funding. Well, what does that help, friends? Indirect funding, money is fungible. If I have to, I'm the Palestinian Authority, and I have to choose between laying a new road, building a new hospital, or paying salaries to terrorists, and the Australians step in and say, you know what? Well, we'll build your hospital for you. Suddenly there's no dilemma. But that enables the Palestinian Authority to do all the evil things that they do. And that really is part of it. It's that education, which it's not only for the Palestinian Authority and changing it, but rather changing the understanding of what the Palestinian Authority is doing, really destroying generations of Palestinian children and leading them to destruction rather than promoting anything that is really creative.
Thank you, Maurice. Catherine, would you like to unmute, please?
Hello, thank you very much, Maurice. My question is there any evidence of international terrorists being paid for slay? And if there is, can that then be pursued through any legal avenues as paying terrorists, like across international lines? Does that give any legal leeway?
Well, so we know that the Palestinian Authority pays all terrorists, including those who have gone abroad, and they continue to receive their salaries. You can, in normal countries, obviously track that funding. Unfortunately, it's not always where they go. They go to countries which are terrorist friendly. If they're being paid a salary as a reward for their terrorism while they sit in plush hotels in Qatar, I fear that there's very little that can really be done about it. As regards international jurisprudence and international law, there are repeated decisions, resolutions of the UN Security Council. I would, as a general rule, I would say to ignore the UN as something which is irrelevant and shameful. I wrote a study on the last year and a half of decisions of the UN Security Council, how shameful they were in their ignorance of the massacre and in their failure to condemn Hamas. So as a general rule, I would say ignore them. But when you're talking about the rest of the world that put such great weight on the decisions and the resolutions passed by the UN, well, why do they ignore all of the resolutions that talk specifically about terrorist funding? resolution, UN Security Resolution 1373 passed in the aftermath of 9/11. It's a great resolution. For those of you who haven't read it, I would recommend that you go and read it. And really, they discuss in great detail what shouldn't be done. There's a UN resolution that prohibits the glorification of terrorism. Do the Palestinians care? Absolutely not. Does anyone else hold them? And really, that's the idea of my position at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs: accountability and reform. Well, if there's no accountability, then you're never going to see any type of reform. And there is no accountability. No one ever says to them, you know what, you're glorifying terrorists. That is a breach of international anti-terrorism resolutions. You're paying salaries to terrorists. You're funding terrorists. All of these are breaches of the fundamentals of fighting terrorism. But no one ever calls them out on it. Well, they're just the Palestinians. It's almost that tremendously and colonial approach, I would say. We have to give these heathens a reduction of some kind because they only want to murder Jews, so it's okay. They're not really coming after anyone else. That's unfortunately the approach, and that's what needs to change. There are avenues, there is a basis, and that's what needs to be pushed and explained every time.
Thank you. We'll take our final question from Hugh Kitson, please.
Hello, Maurice. You know, I've been aware of what you've been talking about for many years. How do you, as an Israeli, feel about the nations of the world, including Australia and the UK, Canada, and so on, wanting to push Israel into a Palestinian state that is basically a terrorist state and wants to get rid of Israel altogether? How do you really feel about that? I mean, we find it shocking.
So I had I was in close contact with the commander with the general in the IDF during my service, and he said to me that every time he considered appeals submitted by soldiers for a refusal to follow an order, he looked at it like this: one finger pointing at the soldier, but three fingers pointing at the commander. Where did you go wrong in explaining the situation? And I feel that is part of our problem. That has been part of our problem for a very long time. Israel has never clearly said, Judea and Samaria is mine. Gaza, as weird as it may sound, is mine. It was given to me by the international community. There will never be another state to the west of the Jordan River. It will never happen. That needs to be a clear statement of the Israeli government. Not will possibly look at a potential path to a two-state solution. No, ladies and gentlemen. There should be an outright rejection of the notion that there will be a Palestinian state. So if Israel is, unfortunately, I apologize if I talk too much about religious subjects, but there's a subject at the beginning of the Talmud section called Baba Metzia. It's one of the civil law codes, and it starts with two people who come from different perspectives, and they each see a talit lying on the floor. They each grab it, and each one says, well, this is mine. All of it's mine. So in that case, religious Jewish law says they divide it up between them and they move on. What happens if one says all of it's mine and the other one says, well, only half of it's mine? So then really the Gemara says, the Talmud says, well, they're really only arguing about the second half. The first half is certainly belongs to the person who said it was all his. And then they just divide up that remaining part. So one person gets 75%, the other one gets 25%. Here we're talking about the same thing, and this is what I claim was also relevant for the ICC, the position of the previous prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda. She said, when we go to look at the position in Judea and Samaria, we have one group of people who says, all of this area from the river to the sea is mine. That's the Palestinians. Then we have this other institution, the State of Israel, which she puts on, obviously, on equal footing, and says, well, this part within the green line, this imaginary line that was drawn in 1949, well, that's all mine. But that other part, well, we'll call it disputed territories. And at that moment, you've lost the argument. That is the problem, not only with the other states of the world, but really look at us first. We need to clearly define, call, and implement our sovereignty from the river to the sea, from Lebanon to the Gulf of Aqaba, all the way through. That is the homeland of the Jewish people, as given, not based on the Bible, based on the decisions of the international community. And as I said, I just recently published an entire article on this, on Israel's legal right to Judea and Samaria, and all the basis, the legal basis for that is in that article. And I would welcome everyone to or invite everyone to go and read. And so that is where we need to start, not with what is Albanese doing to reward terrorism. What are we doing to say this will never happen? There will never be another state to the west of the Jordan River.
Thank you, Maurice. Now, to end off our Zoom tonight, if people want to continue to follow you, to support the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, to keep in touch, how would they get in contact? And please tell us more.
That would be amazing. On the website of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, there is a donation page. And obviously, we would welcome everyone joining us, becoming partners in the work that we do. If anyone has questions, you can send me an email, Maurice, Maurice, @jcpa.org. And I will try. I am somewhat inundated with emails, but I will do my best to respond to everyone as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. I have put that link in the chat. That's jcpa.org, the website. I've just jumped on the website very quickly, very easy to find where to donate. So for everyone who is watching our YouTube recording, listening in on J-Air tomorrow, or on our Facebook Live right now, that is jcpa.org, and Maurice at jcpa.org. Maurice, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for educating us on these complex and interesting matters. I can see the chat is just going wild with credit to you, with thank yous. It's been a fantastic presentation. AJ is pleased to announce that we will be back in Israel in June 2026 for our next AJ trip. So I really think the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs is going to be top of our list to come and visit you in person, to learn more, and to support the fantastic work that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us, and I wish everyone a good evening.
Have a good evening, everyone.